Good morning, everybody. Everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, great. So it's a pleasure to be with you this morning. My name is Laure Cullen. I am the Woodworks Regional Director for the states of Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. There you go. So I'm based in Atlanta, so not terribly far away. Tell you a little bit about myself very quickly. I'm a structural engineer by training. Have about 7 years experience in consulting, and the vast majority of my time was spent doing mixed use multifamily. So type 3, type 5 construction all day long. So like I said, it's a pleasure to be with you today. We are going to be doing an overview, and we're going to start us off with an overview of mass timber. There are a couple of you in the room who I'm going to bore to tears, and I'm sorry about that. But I want to make sure everybody is on the same page. So let's start with a very high level overview of what mass timber is. So like Matt said, I am with an organization called Woodworks. We are a nonprofit, and our sole objective is to provide education and project assistance to architects, structural engineers, contractors, and developers on their wood building projects. Now that could be your light frame wood, type 3, type 5, mixed use, multifamily, or that could be mass timber. So the project assistance that I provide runs the gamut from help the building official will not accept this detail and I've fixed it 3 times. I do that all the time. To help, I just got my first type 3 building and I don't know what's different about it as opposed to type 5. Right? To help, I just got my first mass timber building and I don't know where to get started. Right? That's all I do all day. Right? I also do provide education opportunities, lunch and learn, seminars, that sort of thing. But it's completely free of charge to you. We are a nationwide organization. Like I said, I am a regional director, but there is somebody like me all across the country. So, as Woodworks is a nonprofit, our funding partners are the Softwood Lumber Board, the U.S. Forest Service. We also have several lumber manufacturers, engineered wood product manufacturers, as well as mass timber manufacturers and fabricators, and installers for that matter, who are our Woodworks partners. So, mention this very quickly. Like I said, I do provide a fair amount of education. I am presenting a seminar, a 2-hour seminar on May 15th up in Sandy Springs at the Hudson Grill on Roswell Road. It's going to be focusing on tall mass timber. So if any of you are available, please join me. I will be talking about mass timber for 2 hours, and then we'll have a happy hour. So if you have the opportunity, I'd love to have you there. Now, for our overview, let's talk about our wood construction methodologies, right? The image on the left, that is our light wood frame. We're quite familiar with this. This is our 2x4, 2x6 walls. And then our floor and roof system of choice. Joists, pre-engineered trusses, whatever the case may be. We see these in single family all the time, single family residential. We also see them quite often in multifamily, in our apartments, condos, hotels. So we see that quite commonly. The image in the center is what we call heavy timber. Now what sets heavy timber apart is the use of solid wood members, right? Our posts and beams. Our beams are completely solid. Our posts are completely solid. We actually don't see this type of construction much anymore. What is analogous to type 4 or type 4 HT construction. We don't see this type of construction much anymore, though it was much more common 100 so years ago. Finally, we have mass timber. And what sets mass timber apart is the use of laminations. Right? So we've got dimensional lumber, 2x laid either on top of one another or next to each other with a layer of adhesive in between the layers. So a lot of my people in the room know glue laminated timber, glue lams. That is considered mass timber. Okay? Images on the left, glue laminated timber. A lot of us are quite familiar with those. These are our 2x members that are laid on their broad face. We place a layer of adhesive, and then we place another 2x on top of that until we get the required depth or desired depth. We typically use these for beams and columns. Can easily get them 60+ feet long. We can pressure treat these glue lambs. We can also fire retardant treat those, to my understanding. The images in the center, cross-laminated timber. This is probably the buzziest mass timber product these days. It is very similar to plywood. So in this case, you place 2x members next to each other on their broad face. You place a layer of adhesive, and then the layer on top of that is rotated 90 degrees. Right? You create these CLT panels. Right? You can easily get panels that are 12 feet wide, 60 feet long. 60 feet long. We use these for floor and roof panels. We can also use them for walls. Okay, finally, we do have another CLT product with structural composite lumber laminations. So it has the same layup where you've got one layer in one direction and the layer on top is rotated 90 degrees. But in this case, we're using LVL, laminated veneer lumber laminations, instead of dimensional lumber. Okay, moving on, dowel laminated timber. This one's a really interesting product. So this is the only mass timber product that has no adhesive, with the exception of the finger jointing. So in this case, we place our 2x's next to each other on their short face. While those 2x's are still moist, we drill a hole in them. And then we insert a hardwood dowel. Now, as that moisture content comes out of the 2x's, the hole shrinks, the dowel takes on that moisture, and you have a hard connection. We also have nail laminated timber. This is merely 2x's laid next to each other on their short face, and you nail them together at a specified nailing pattern. Finally, you have glue laminated timber, or GLT, which you can absolutely use for floors and roofs. You just rotate it 90 degrees. Okay, so let's start with nail laminated timber. This is our only mass timber product that is typically not manufactured and fabricated off-site. The vast majority of our mass timber components are manufactured somewhere else, trucked to the site, and dropped into place. Nail laminated timber, there just aren't any facilities for those. So they're often manufactured on site. Like I said, you're merely placing these together and nailing them together at a specified nailing pattern. NLT can be very attractive in very specific instances, one of which is Living Building Challenge certification. If you're familiar with it, Living Building Challenge certification is, as it has been termed, LEED on steroids. There is currently one Living Building Challenge certified building in the state of Georgia. It is the Candida Building for Innovative Sustainable Design on Georgia Tech's campus. It is at the corner of First and Hemphill. So I believe this one was completed in 2019. I believe that's right. So it is 2 stories. It's a type 3B building. So NLT floors and roofs, glue lamb, beams, and columns. And I will also give a plug if anybody is interested in learning more about this project. The structural engineer is Matt Cantner, who will be talking in just a little bit about the Macon Airport. So he'll be happy to talk more about that with you. Okay, dowel laminated timber. This is the one where you insert that hardwood dowel. Very straightforward. Officially, it is not recognized in the building code. So officially, you need a variance from the building official in order to use it in your project, use it in your building. We do have an example of dowel laminated timber in the Atlanta area. This is the Campus 244 project. in Dunwoody, just south of Perimeter Mall off of Ashford Dunwoody Road. This project is very interesting. It is a mass timber overbuild. So it is 2 stories of DLT and glulam on top of an existing 3-story building. So what is really interesting about this project is that because mass timber is so much lighter than concrete or steel, they actually did not have to touch the existing foundations in order to add these 2 stories of glulam and DLT. Turned out beautifully. It's, as you can see in this photo here, it is right up against I-285. I will say that I almost had an accident in the car the first time I saw the mass timber being installed. So, all right. So moving on, cross-laminated timber. Like I said, this is the buzziest mass timber product at present. So this is the one that has a layup like plywood where they're rotated 90 degrees. One thing that's interesting about CLT is that it has strength in 2 directions, what we call two-way action. It behaves similarly to a post-tension concrete flat plate. So no beams. Because you have strength in 2 directions, it is possible to eliminate beams altogether with CLT. It's possible. So like I said, you can easily get panels in widths of up to 12 feet wide, 60 feet long. Because of the layup, you always have an odd number of plies. Your minimum ply is going to be a 3-ply. Can easily do a 5, 7, 9-ply CLT panel. I would make the argument that once you get to 7 or 9 plies, that's not the most efficient design, but we could absolutely have that conversation. 619 Ponce, Matt referred to this just a few minutes ago. This is the 4-story mass timber building right next to Ponce City Market, or the original Phase 1 Ponce City Market. It is at the corner of Ponce de Leon Avenue and Glen Iris. Used to be a surface parking lot. So it is 120,000 square feet altogether, 4 stories. 4 stories, and it was permitted as Type 3B. If you have not been in this building yet, there is a pottery barn on the ground floor, and then the top 3 levels are office. All right, let's talk about a couple of framing scenarios for our mass timber buildings. You can absolutely do what we call post beam and plate. This is when we use glulam beams and columns along with your mass timber panel of choice, CLT, DLT, whatever the case may be. Mentioned this just a second ago. This other option we call post and plate. Because of CLT's strength in 2 directions, we can actually shallow up the span between columns, and we can eliminate the beams altogether. This is a particularly appealing option in taller multifamily projects, and we're seeing more and more of these across the country. You're shallowing up the spans between columns, which you can easily hide in your interior walls, your demising walls. So this is a very attractive option. We also have something we call honeycomb, which is in this case CLT bearing walls along with CLT floors and roofs. This photo that I'm showing here is actually a hotel at Redstone Arsenal outside of Huntsville, Alabama. This is what is called privatized Army lodging. So the Army built these hotels all across the country, specifically with mass timber bearing walls, with mass timber floors and roofs. And why did they do that? Well, as it turns out, mass timber actually performs quite well in blast design because of its flexibility. Looking at a couple of hybrid options, you can absolutely do stick walls with mass timber floors and roofs. You can absolutely do your 2x4 walls, your 2x6 walls with CLT, DLT, whatever the case may be. It's an attractive option for type 3, type 5 construction. I am seeing more developers, more architects, specifically in Atlanta, looking at this option. So it's an interesting scenario because you can expose the underside of that panel, leave it completely exposed, and provide a differentiated experience in your multifamily building. Final option, we have hybrid steel and mass timber. You can absolutely do steel framing along with your mass timber panel of choice. This is a great option for developers who perhaps are not fully committed to mass timber, want to dip their toe in before they go all in. There is a steel and CLT building in West Midtown in Atlanta. It's the Echo Street West office building. So it is steel framing, which is painted a matte black, and then Southern Yellow Pine CLT is actually beautiful together. So, all right, so why consider mass timber, right? Why consider mass timber? There are several reasons why we would consider mass timber. First of all, I will say, if you've never been in a mass timber building, I highly recommend you go visit one. Start with Pottery Barn, if you can. Just go whenever they're open. It is a different experience than any other building type that you've been in. As soon as you walk in the door, the smell of the wood hits you, right? Also, there's this idea of biophilia, the concept of bringing the outdoors in. The occupants in mass timber buildings are calmer, less stressed. Their heart rate's slow, right? But aside from that, I can talk about that all day. Why consider mass timber? Why consider mass timber for your building project? Several reasons. Construction speed. The construction of a mass timber building is significantly faster than steel or concrete, particularly concrete, because there's no formwork. There's no formwork. Mass timber is lighter than steel or concrete, therefore your foundations are smaller, therefore less site work. An additional benefit is labor on site, which, as we know, is a concern, right? Because the vast majority of these components are manufactured and fabricated somewhere else, right? Connections are installed, everything. You are literally trucking these components to the site, dropping them into place. I'll pause here for a second and talk about a story from 619 Ponce. So if you're familiar with the area, while 619 Ponce was under construction, there was a 22-story concrete building under construction at the same time, directly behind it. So it was directly behind 619 Ponce. They actually both buildings shared a tower crane, which I'm sure must have been a logistical nightmare, right? So for this 22-story concrete building, they had on average 120 workers on site on this concrete building, as opposed to 619 Ponce. The most workers, the highest number of workers that they had on site at 619 Ponce was 8. I am not kidding. They would pick these components up off the truck, drop them into place. The connections slide in, or they fit together right away, and then you move on to the next area, right? Additionally, and we'll talk about this very quickly, the finishes, right? So the building code in most construction types allows you to expose this mass timber, right? Typically you're exposing the underside or your framing, right? That's those finishes that you do not have to pay for. So just some things to be thinking about. Also, do you have an owner that has a sustainability focus? Are they interested in reducing carbon? Are they looking for a green certification, such as LEED, Living Building Challenge? Mass timber absolutely helps you do that, right? So as we know, time is money. Time is money. In construction, you can easily save 25% on your schedule when you're building a mass timber building. That means you're turning the building back or over to the owner faster. They're getting tenants in sooner. And we can show that they are charging more money in rent in a mass timber building. So one thing that doesn't get talked about a whole lot when Jamestown talks about 619 Ponce, 619 Ponce recently broke the leasing rate record in the history of the city of Atlanta for the top 2 floors of 619 Ponce, right? I will also say we had 2 mass timber office buildings come online during the pandemic. Mass timber office. Nobody is building office right now, but they're both fully occupied, which is unusual. It's very unusual. Right, so like I said, you're on site for less time, right? You'll also be pleasantly surprised, for my contractors in the room, CA, construction, the construction phase of a project is actually a lot more straightforward than other project types, than other building materials, right? I also mentioned this, mass timber is significantly lighter than steel or concrete. 75% lighter, right? So that helps. That means smaller foundations. That also means less site work. That can be an advantage in problematic sites or sites with problematic soils. Also in urban infill sites. Okay. And finally, the idea of embodied carbon. Matt talked about this just a minute ago. The fact that these trees take in carbon dioxide, the carbon is stored in the wood for the life of that wood, right? And then oxygen is released back out into the atmosphere. So when we build a mass timber building, that carbon remains in those wood components in the building. So it's a huge carbon savings. Right. Talk very quickly about construction types and where the building code allows us to use mass timber. So I'll say very quickly, the building code, the International Building Code, gives us 5 construction types. Type 1 is the tallest. Type 5 is our shortest. We often see our wood construction in types 3, 4, and 5. Right? That's typically where we see it. And types 1 and 2 are what we call our non-combustible construction types. Types 3, 4, and 5, where wood is allowed, is considered the combustible construction types. However, the building code allows us to use mass timber in types 1 and 2. Right? The building code allows us to use mass timber at the roof in types 1B and type 2. We are seeing this used more and more, particularly in airports. If you're not familiar, the Portland, Oregon airport is actually undergoing a significant expansion, and it is all using mass timber. So if you want to do a Google search, the airport is actually gorgeous. I highly recommend you take a look at that. All right. I want to talk about this very quickly. Matt alluded to this just a few minutes ago. So there are 3 new construction subtypes in IBC 2021. They're all specific to mass timber. So type 4A, the one on the left, 18 stories 270 feet tall. The one in the center, type 4B, 12 stories, 180 feet tall. And then finally type 4C, the short one, 9 stories, 85 feet tall. Right? There are requirements for coverage of the mass timber in types 4A and 4B with some sort of non-combustible covering, but we can talk through that. It varies based on the construction type. So I wanted to say that to say this. If you are in the AEC community in Georgia, you understand that Georgia is currently under IBC 2018. We are currently on track to adopt IBC 2024 with an effective date of January 1st of next year. However, these tall mass timber construction types are an addendum to our current building code. Right? It's Appendix P, to be specific. And those were in effect January 1st of 2022. So we have a code precedent right now to build up to 18 stories tall with mass timber. All right, my final topic for today, fire resistance. I'll talk about this very briefly. So this is something I talk about a lot, the fire resistance of wood. How do we know that this component is going to be okay if it burns, right? So when we're using wood as building materials, we do extensive testing, be it dimensional lumber, be it an LVL, be it a glue lam, be it a CLT panel. We know how it burns. We know that when it burns, the outside layers char, right? It forms a char layer, and that char layer protects the inside or the remaining cross section of that component, right? And so what the building code allows us to do is it allows us to go to the National Design Specification for Wood Construction. It is the wood material standard for your structural engineers. And it allows us to calculate char, the amount of char that will develop on a given component over a certain period of time. And we can assign a fire rating to that. 0 hours, 1 hour, 2 hours. So, and we can use that method for up to 2 hours of fire rating. All right, any questions? Yeah.
619 pots, the components, where are those manufactured and where were they shipped from?
That's a very good question. Thank you very much. I wanted to make sure I got through this material so I didn't talk that much about it. So the 619 Ponce is a very interesting building project. So obviously, the owner of Ponce City Market and 619 Ponce is a developer called Jamestown. Their North American headquarters is at Ponce City Market. They own forest land. That was an investment strategy that they had. And when they decided to build 619 Ponce, they harvested their own timber around Lumpkin, outside of Lumpkin, Georgia. They harvested their own timber, took those logs down to Georgia Pacific, the Georgia Pacific sawmill outside of Albany, or Albany, depending on where you're from. Those logs were milled. Then those components were those 2x were taken to Smartland North America in Dothan, Alabama, southeast Alabama. So Smartland has a southern yellow pine, glue lam, and CLT manufacturing facility in Dothan. So those components were made into glue lam and CLT in Dothan. They were trucked back to the site and installed there. Any other questions? All right. Thank y'all very much.